As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quist changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quist only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quist. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
You should be ready to invest in your employees, period. That is something that I dearly, dearly believe, is that you should be willing to invest resources in your employees, but especially Gen Z, because they kind of got the short end of the stick over the last decade, right? Looking at what's happened during the pandemic, they didn't get the training, the internships. They didn't get the same kind of in-school training that we did because of the pandemic. A lot of their final few years of schooling, they missed a lot of those opportunities. To the Gen Zers, I would say, you probably need to separate your wants from your needs. When you're thinking about, this is what I want an environment to look like, this is what I want it to be, think about, what do you need it to be rather than want it to be.
That was Michelle Quist Ryder on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
I'm here with Debbie to introduce today's episode with Michelle Quist Ryder, and we are talking about generational differences in the workplace. So you know those challenges that show up when you have maybe a boss who is in their 60s and you have somebody who's just entering the workforce in their 20s or 30s, and some of the challenges that come up inside of those differences. So Debbie, what did you think of this episode?
Oh, I thought it was really fascinating. And what's interesting to me is that if you start talking about generations, right, and especially something like this, how are generations different in the workplace? A lot of people will point out there's a lot of variability within these groups. And they're absolutely right. And the two of you say that right off the bat.
Right out of the gate.
It's not like Gen X's, they're all the same, or baby boomers or Gen Z. That's absolutely true. But there are also cohort effects over the course of time, right? We are contextual behavioral scientists, and we think about human behavior in context. And that, to me, includes the historic, the cultural, the political, the economic context in which we live and work. And those have changed drastically. And right now in the workforce, we have a lot of baby boomers have retired, but a lot of them, especially the younger ones, are still in the workplace. And then we have, the young people who are just out of school and starting their first career, and how very different they are, even just economically. You think about the economic landscape of the baby boomers versus today. It is completely different. And so to me, what this is about is really just looking at these contexts that are so important. But often they could get a little bit overlooked when we think about the workplace. We kind of have a model in our minds. And so anyway, I just love this conversation because I think there was a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we didn't talk so much about those contextual factors. Like, for example, we know just sort of factually that the cost to buy a home has grown exponentially, but the amount of money people are making has not grown to be commensurate with how expensive it is to live. Or the other example I think of that Michelle and I actually did speak about is that the expectations of what work looks like during a regular workday. So in the past, there were a lot of, just kind of like basic menial tasks that needed to be done that didn't require a lot of effort or energy or attention. And all of those things have been automated or offloaded. And so we're now spending our work days with really high mental load required to stay dialed in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in grad school, there were these professors who were these men much older than me, and he would talk about going out for 3 martini lunches with their colleagues, right? And you just picture these, they had a secretary, they had no real responsibility at home, and they would do this on a regular basis. And you think, times have changed a lot.
Times have
right?
changed. Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. They might have worked 9 to 5, but taken 3 hours out of their day, to not be working. Whereas now the expectation is people are answering emails at 10 o'clock at night, that they're working, these long days. And yeah, so you're absolutely right. That contextual landscape has changed a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, I wrote my book on burnout and have been really paying attention to that conversation. And I think what we're seeing is that we have conditions right now where burnout is high, and burnout absolutely has to be addressed on that systemic and cultural level. And I think some of the things that are going on in the workplace have contributed to burnout. And what we're seeing right now is the shift where people are speaking up about that. And they're saying, I don't want to do that anymore. And I think you really speak to that, how at this point, there's a really strong narrative around the healthy workplace and, versus these really problematic workplaces in terms of well-being and mental health. And so the good news is that I think these conversations are exactly what's needed at this moment.
I completely agree. This is that shift away from what do you as an individual need to do because you feel stressed out, and more like what do we need to address in terms of the larger, or, because when we talk about organizational change, well, what is an organization? An organization is made up of people. And so it's really looking at who are those people that are decision makers that have power within organizations, and how can we help them make some of these shifts so that we have greater harmony in the workplace and we can create a climate, a culture that works better for everyone.
Yes.
Okay, well, we hope you get a lot out of this episode with Michelle Quist Ryder. Hey, everybody, it's Jill here. And today I have with me Dr. Michelle Quist Ryder, who is a social psychologist, research professional, and the CEO of the American Psychological Foundation, a super cool organization that leverages the power of philanthropy to invest in research and advance psychological knowledge. Dr. Quist Ryder has an extensive background in human-centric organizational design, effective DEI practices, and leveraging psychology to solve critical societal issues. Welcome, Michelle. I'm so excited to have you here on Psychologists Off the Clock.
Jill, I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we are here today to talk about some interesting challenges that have come up in the workplace, specifically around having different generations of people working together in organizations and sometimes having very different values, priorities, beliefs, assumptions. So specifically, we're talking about having, say baby boomers and Gen Xers who might be in C-suite and management positions, who are then working with millennials and Gen Z staff. And those millennials and Gen Zers will eventually be managing Gen Alphas and so on and so forth. And that this can create like some real cultural differences in the workplace, differences that are likely to stay. So what Michelle and I are going to talk about today is what we're getting wrong and what we can do differently to close some of those gaps. And so I think we need to start by kind of stating the obvious that, of course, we cannot overgeneralize an entire generation and make assumptions that, every 30-year-old or every 60-year-old is a certain way. So we'll kind of get that out of the way. We recognize we will be talking in some generalizations today. And so what we talk about, of course, will not apply to every person, but it is based on research and observations of these groups. in general. So with that piece out of the way, why don't we start by really orienting people to who is a boomer, a Gen X, or a millennial, et cetera, in terms of years of birth? Because I think we all get confused by that, myself included.
I love that you brought up that we can't generalize everybody together. It's like we can't put everyone in the same, we can't assume everyone of the same generation is going to be the same. And that's something that I always like to point out as well. It's easy to think, oh, I'm hiring a Gen Z, I need to treat them like this, when that can be a fallacy. Really, honestly, if you think about those lines that we draw between generation, someone close to those age groups are going to be the same. 1979 and 1980 is Gen X and millennial, but they're going to be closer than people who are in the middle of those years. So I really love that you brought that up. Baby boomers, I think, are around like 1946 to 1964, something like that. That kind of 15 years. It's really, generations are about 15 years. So the boundaries get a little fuzzy. Gen X is 65 to 80. Millennials are 81 to just before 2000. And then Gen Z is going to be 95 to 2010, 96 to 2010, something like that, depending on who you talk to and where they put those boundaries.
And then anyone younger than that so far is Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha,
right?
Yes. Yeah. Although I think you have to be careful though, because millennials started out as Gen Y, and then Gen Z started out as iGen. So I think
That's
the names
right.
change as you go.
And sometimes you hear people say Zennials.
Zennials, yes,
right?
Yes.
What are Zennials? Do we know
I think
what Zennials
it's a
are?
mix of millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah. Something like that.
Oh, wait, unless you're talking about the Xennials, in which those are the Gen X and the millennials. Because really the 80 through 85, 86 or something, they're kind of their own little microcosm of a generation. They're millennials, but they were there when computers started being used in school. And so I was born in 1980. So according to some reckoning, I'm a Gen X, and in some reckoning, I'm a millennial. But I remember learning how to use computers. I remember all of that. But I remember also having the option right up until my junior or senior year of high school that I could handwrite all of my papers.
Yeah.
That is not an option anymore. So I think really that computer taking over a lot of the learning and a lot of how you interact in a household and all of those things kind of marks a generational difference. And so we have those Xennials that are Gen X, but kind of millennial, but kind of Gen X.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. And that when you have the older Gen Xers, most of their growing up years were pre-technology. And when you have millennials, all of their growing up years have been with technology. And there's this kind of 5-year gap where it's sort of both. Yeah. Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I am super excited to announce that I will be speaking at one of the largest and truly most inspiring and meaningful psychotherapy conferences we have here in the US, the Psychotherapy Networker Conference. Other speakers include Esther Perel, John Kabat-Zinn, Ramani Durvasula, David Kessler, and so many more. I am just thrilled and honored to be among this esteemed faculty. The conference is being held March 20th to the 23rd in Washington, D.C., and if you register now, you can get early bird rates and save up to 40%. Plus, you can get an additional $50 off when you use the code SYM50. That's SYM50. So go to our website, offtheclockpsych.com, and click on our books and offers page and register today. Well, it's so interesting to think about the impact that technology and other contextual variables have had on different generations. So tell us a little bit about, what is it that you were seeing or experiencing that made you really want to delve into understanding this issue of different generations in the workplace?
Honestly, it started when I was a professor. I kind of went through grad school a little bit later than most people do. So I started teaching when I was in my mid-30s. I was a professor, and I had gone to a few different varieties of college. I had gone online. I had gone and actually did a mail order course. I had gone to a traditional campus. I had done a bunch of different things, and I had been a student kind of off and on for a while. And so when I went into the classroom, I had some very set ideas of what I thought it meant to be a student, right? Of this is how you operate as a student. This is how your attitude toward completing assignments. This is all of those things. I kind of had this thought of what that should should be like. And so when I started interacting with my students, though, I realized that they didn't see things the same way that I did. And I made the mistake at the beginning of thinking, oh, well, these kids, well, they just have to learn that this is how you should learn. This is how you should be a student. This is what should be your priority. And it wasn't until I had one student come into my office wanting to talk about her grade, and she broke down in tears because she got a B+ instead of an A. And it just struck me at that moment that I never would have cried about a B+. Like I would have been upset about it because I liked getting A's and I generally made good grades. So I might have been upset about it, but I would not have broken down in tears in front of my professor. And so I started really looking at what my students were thinking and feeling, and honestly listening to what they were saying to me about what they needed out of the classroom. And I realized that they really honestly are in a different position in so many ways than I had ever been when I was going to school. The level of anxiety they have about everything, about getting their degree. What kind of loans are they going to have to take out? What kind of debt are they going to be in when they're done with their degree? Where are they going to be able to find a job when they're done with their degree? What's happening in the world? Because if you think about Gen Z and how they've grown up, there's been a lot of really difficult situations that they've gone through since birth, really. So this level of anxiety about the world, and then the level of pressure they're putting on themselves to be successful. They are taking a lot of that on themselves. And so I realized this level of anxiety really was just different. I also think that the way that they have grown, the context of the environment as they've been aging has been just different and has led to them having different perspectives. And so instead of trying to just make them conform to what I wanted them to be, I really wanted to kind of dig into what I was seeing and how could I help them and alleviate some of that anxiety and really sort of put them on the path of success. So after being a professor, I was a professor for about 7 years, and then I decided I wanted to move into industry, and I started working for the American Psychological Foundation. And so now I run the foundation as the CEO, and it struck me that it's really my job to set the tone of my office. It's of the culture of my company, and what do I want that culture to be? So I have some Gen Z, and I have some millennials, and I have even a couple Gen Xers and some baby boomers. So I have really the whole spectrum of generations. And it was important to me to think about the differences of each of those generations and make sure that everyone had their needs met and felt at home in my organization.
That sounds like such a tall order. And some of the things that stand out to me are how often we might base what we do on our own previous experience. Sometimes people parent the way they were parented, or they do the exact opposite because they didn't like the way they were parented. And I will admit, I came out of my graduate school experience was with a, kind of hardcore academic environment that had a certain tone to it. And then when I was working in academia myself, it was a different kind of environment. It was at a professional school, and it was just a kind of kinder and gentler sort of place. And what I realized is I went in there bringing my old academic environment with me, and it was the only thing I knew. And so I would put those burdens and expectations on my students. But then I suppose they were very fortunate to get to watch other people model a different way of being in academia. And I was like, oh, gosh, that's what I wish I had had. And it's okay to do that? Like, okay, I'll do that. And what all of that sort of resulted in is having like one-on-one conversations with people, trying to get away from an assumption about the way things, quote unquote, should be, or what everyone, what I think everyone needs, and really talking to them about, tell me about what good supervision has looked like for you in the past. Tell me what has been more problematic. What is your best style? What are your needs? Or I would even, kind of admit, like, for example, I'm not the type of mentor who's like a super hand holder. I think it's important that part of the learning process is for you to figure out how to solve problems. If you have a question, for example, about like, what's a t-test, I expect you to try to find the answer before you come to me and ask me for the answer. And if that's not consistent with what you're expecting from a mentor, then we probably won't be a good fit. So trying to kind of both assess individual needs and sort of recognize my own values and priorities in terms of finding a fit. But that was in an environment where like students and professors sort of picked each other. It wasn't a typical work organization. I mean, I suppose you choose your staff, you interview and all of that. But, that may not be realistic in certain organizations.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think that element of listening is really so important. It's only natural to take your own experience and feel like it's going to be repeated because that's your frame of reference. That's how you learned. So that's how you think, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and learn. And that's what I was doing walking into my professorship. It's like, okay, well, this is how I learned. So this is how I'm going to teach. And the ability to be open to looking around you and saying, well, how are they doing it? Is that better than what I'm doing? And should I adapt? I think is the key, really, because we're always going to bring our own experience. We're always going to do that. And if we aren't open, if we're only going to keep it in that experience, and honestly, you see that so much. You see a lot of people, especially in the workplace, saying, oh, these kids, they don't understand. They don't understand how it's supposed to be. This is how you're supposed to work. And there's all of this feeling that even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, before the pandemic, that because it was that way at that point, that's how it should be now. And it's this sense that we are going to make things right when we bring it into our frame of reference. That's what gets us into trouble because, not everybody has that same frame of reference. And it's really a beautiful thing when you dig into the research of generations and how they have adapted workplaces over the years. You can find, 25 years ago, they're writing articles about the difference between the traditionalists, which were the ones before baby boomers, and then how they have to adapt for baby boomers, and then how baby boomers are then going to have to adapt for Gen X, and then how Gen X adapts for millennials. And this is how we change. This is natural. This is the evolution of the workplace.
And so it's the definition of progress.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we didn't used to have car seats and we didn't used to wear seatbelts. And isn't it lovely that we have research to tell us, hey, this is going to keep you safe if you have a car accident? And there are a million other examples of progress. And people do tend to be resistant to change, but thank goodness for it, or we wouldn't have any progress.
Right. And really, that's what you have to do is be open to how you can make things better and be willing to let go of the things that don't really matter. Because some of the things we're holding on to aren't things that actually matter in the grand scheme of things. They don't make things better. They just are a particular way of being.
Which is just comfortable because it's familiar.
Right.
So what are some of those things? Like, what do you think it is that we're getting wrong? Like, where are the problems and the challenges, not just in the global sense of we have this different frame of reference, but what are some of the specific challenges that you've seen coming up in organizations?
So the biggest one I think happening right now that is almost the level of maybe a crisis is work from home. I mean, the remote working option, during the pandemic, it really was a paradigm shift. It wasn't something that happened slowly. I mean, people worked from home before the pandemic, but it was certainly not the norm. It was every once in a while. It was every couple key positions. I don't remember the percentage, but it was a small percentage of people who could work from home. And but it wasn't the norm, certainly. You went to work, you went into an office 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, whatever, you're in the office every day. And then the pandemic hit, and it turns out we can be productive from home. In fact, you look at some of the earnings statements from the companies. Amazon is a big one. And not only did they do fine working from home, but they exceeded, they did well working from home. And it turns out people can be productive from home. And so that really just turned into this paradigm shift where now all of a sudden workers are saying, well, if I can work from home and I can be just as productive and your company is doing just as well, why shouldn't I be able to do that? Because look at these pieces of my life that I've reclaimed. I don't have to commute. I don't have to go out for lunch every day. I don't have to buy fancy clothes. All of the benefits. I can do laundry in the middle of the day. All of those things they can do and still be productive. So now all of a sudden it's this freedom that we had that's being taken away by all of these return to office orders. So I think honestly, that is the biggest thing I see right now.
And Amazon's an interesting example because it's my understanding that in fact, I know this to be true, at least in certain areas where they said, this change is here to stay. In fact, if you want to move to a different state, no problem, because we're all going to keep working remote. And then just recently, they said, just kidding. Everyone's coming back to the office 5 days a week. And that may not be true of every single Amazon employee, but many, many employees are being told you must come back to the office after they've moved 2,000 miles away. And it's creating a crisis. And when you ask, like, well, why? What's the rationale? Is there data that people aren't showing up? They aren't doing their job. And as you're saying, like, no, it's just seems like it's just old school thinking. Like, this is the way we did it. So this is the way you're going to do it.
Right. And I use Amazon exactly because of that, because you can watch the way that they changed over time. At first, it was like, nope, this is great. Everybody work from home. We're saving so much money on buildings. This is fantastic. And then they said, you know what, maybe 2 days a week. Everybody come in 2 days a week. And then it was 3 and now it's 5. And now they're just like, this was the norm before the pandemic. So we're just going to go back to that because we're better when we're together. There's a better, I read the person who made this decision is Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon. And I read the letter that he wrote. It was in a news story. And it talked about how they were more creative when they were as a team. They worked better as a team. They related to each other more as a team and all of those things. And all of those might be true. I have no idea what he was looking at to say that was the case. It might be true. And I'm not going to tell anybody that they're doing something wrong with their decisions that they're making for their company. I'm certainly not in his position. But it makes me wonder, what are you looking at? And just this sense of this is how it was before, so we're going to go back to that. I think there's a few things to unpack there because honestly, the nature of work itself has changed since before the pandemic. So many people who are being called back to the office go into the office to get on Zoom calls to talk to people. So now you have a bunch of people in the office that are on Zoom calls. And why do they need to be in the office to do that when they could be at home to do that? And then you also have the sense of, okay, yes, you have the right to make your company however you want to make it. You have that right. But your employees have the right to then leave if they don't like that. So who are you losing? Who's not in your room because you're making this decision unilaterally that this is how people should work and this is how people work best? So I think if you're going to make that decision based on some data, you better be really sure about that data. And you better think about all of those other things. What are you losing? Who are you losing? What are you not giving your employees that they need? And what is that going to do to your business? Because, employees are going to make it fair. That's one thing about employees is that's why investing in your employees is a good idea, because if they feel like you think they're worth it, they will give you their best. But if they feel like you are taking something from them, then they're going to make it equal somehow. So they're not going to give you their best. So I think it's worth taking a look at.
One of your areas of expertise is self-determination theory, which we talk about a lot on the podcast and, of course, applies very much to issues of workplace and organizational health. So remind our listeners what the 3 aspects of self-determination theory are and how that relates to our discussion here.
Yeah, absolutely. I love self-determination theory. I honestly think that everybody should learn it because I think it's so helpful, even just looking at your own motivations and behavior. But basically, self-determination theory is a theory of human motivation that explains everything that we do. And the 3 tenets I think you're talking about are the 3 basic needs that we are constantly trying to fulfill. One of them is competence. And this is this feeling that we want to be optimally challenged. We don't like to be bored, but we also don't like things to be too easy. If you think about something like a video game, right? You want that video game to be challenging, but if it's too easy, you're going to get bored. But if it's too hard, you're going to get frustrated. So you want to be optimally challenged. The second one is autonomy. We like to have this sense of self-direction. We want choices. We want the freedom to make those choices, to decide what we're going to do. You sometimes maybe have this thought where if someone tells you to do something, you have this instinctive, well, I don't want to. But if you're given the choice, then all of a sudden you do, that's that sense of autonomy. And then the third one is relatedness. Relatedness is this sense that somebody cares about you, that you have a connection with somebody else, that if you got in an accident situation, there's somebody that you could call that would come help you. So this sense of connection to other people's is relatedness. So those are the three basic needs of self-determination theory. And self-determination theory says that when we have those needs met, then we are happier. We have better health and well-being outcomes. But when those needs aren't met, in fact, specifically when they're unmet, because there's the sense those needs aren't being met, but then there's the sense that we're lacking in those needs. And when we're lacking in those needs, those cause a lot of problems. And that's when we tend to seek out ways to fulfill those needs that may or may not be healthy. And that causes us to spiral into things like anxiety and depression and other negative outcomes.
Or leaving a job. And the thing that comes to mind for me that's like the opposite of all of those things is being micromanaged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This sense that really just kills all of them. It's like
Right.
competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Because
Yeah.
if you're being micromanaged, you feel like your manager doesn't trust you, right? So then that relatedness, that relationship's out the window. If you're being micromanaged, they're telling you what to do all the time. So your autonomy is out the window. And then also your sense of competence. If you feel like you're being micromanaged, then you get the sense that people don't think you're doing your job well. And if you're not doing your job well, you don't feel competent. So yeah, micromanaging just kills all three needs and causes a big problem.
And it feels like there's some of that baked into the, nope, sorry, you must come back into the office, in terms of the work from home. Like, I don't trust you to do your job and do it well when you're not here under my watchful eye. And that may not be the intention at all. But I do wonder if that's part of the interpretation when staff are suddenly being told, you must come back in because that's how we used to do it.
Absolutely. I think autonomy is the biggest driver there, because now someone's telling you have to be in the office and not giving you a good reason why, not a reason that's right in front of you that's tangible. They might say, well, it's better for the company. And honestly, if it's better for the company but worse for you, then that's not going to be a great reason for you to want to do that. And so they're telling you don't have this choice in doing this thing. You have to do this thing that you don't like. But then when you're in the office, you also have a decrease in autonomy, because now you can't go change the laundry. You have to look busy.
Right.
You have to fulfill all those expectations of being in the office. So that is going to sap your autonomy need as well. And now that you have this thing to compare it to of how things used to be when it was great, then it's just going to cause a lot of problems.
And this idea of it's better for the company also may be really short-sighted, because, a company is only as healthy as its staff, and its staff, feeling dedicated and wanting to give and work hard. And one of the biggest impactors to bottom line is turnover.
Absolutely.
And so when you invest in the wellness of your workforce, you're really investing in the health of your company, and you're avoiding that turnover that sucks up so many resources in terms of time and money. And I wonder if that's part of what's not really being considered in some of these, you must do this, this, and this, especially with the work from home issue.
Right. I wonder that too, especially I was talking to a lawyer about this, the return to office mandate. And she was actually on the other side of this, saying, well, we'd have to change all of these systems, and we would have to invest a lot of resource in changing systems to let people work from home. And that's not a place that we want to invest all of our resources. So it's easier just to bring people to the office. And I had this thought that, yeah, you might be right. You might have to change your management systems. You might have to do all of that. But that's a one-time cost, which honestly, it's probably not even that big of a cost, given that you should be evaluating your management systems anyway.
Right.
But so you change your management systems, you figure out how to accommodate these people, and you stay a good draw of people who want to come to your company. Whereas if you choose not to invest there, then you're going to have people leaving. You're going to have a high rate of turnover. And how many resources are you losing then? And again, I don't want to tell anybody what to do with their business. And there definitely are people who want to be in the office. There are anywhere 15 to 20% of people love to work from the office and would work there full time. 15 to 20% of people want to work at home full time. But all those people in the middle want something hybrid. They want that flexibility and that autonomy. So if you are just shutting your door on that strictly because you don't want to spend the resources to change the way that you do work to allow for it, then I don't know, it kind of feels like you're shooting yourself in the foot, because who are you going to be able to attract, especially knowing that the people who are coming up, Gen Z, who in the next few years is going to eclipse everybody and be the biggest group of people in the workplace. And this is very important to them.
Right.
And so how short-sighted are you being, to put it, as you said there? I think they are being short-sighted, that they're not remaining competitive in that area.
Well, and when I think about how often assumptions play a role in this, maybe there's a little bit of data, but I do think people make assumptions and they're often based on fear. I'm afraid if I let them do whatever they want, they're just going to take advantage all willy-nilly. There's a fear that there will be some terrible outcome. And what do we do when we're afraid? We try to control. And what do we do when we try to control? People tend to rebel. Like, it just doesn't work. And I think one set of assumptions that I've heard out in the ether is this idea that, the Gen Zers are these delicate snowflakes and they don't want to work and they're lazy. And I think there is an entirely different way to look at that, which is they're actually really wise in that they're seeing these older generations who work 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week. They're emailing and working after they get home at night. They're missing out on life. They're missing out on vacation, or kids. They're not taking their PTO, and they're burning out. And I think now, people who are coming up into the workforce are like, yeah, I don't think we want to do that. And that's just wisdom. Like, can we learn from the mistakes that we've made and instead say, you know what? Like, it's called a 40-hour work week. And some evidence even shows we're more productive if we work less than that, not more. And if you really think about, like, where is the messaging coming from? Who stands to benefit from trying to maintain this busyness as a badge of honor and stress and working a billion hours and not taking PTO? That's the very few at the tippity top that benefit from maintaining that kind of culture, right? If we have the people that are sort of downstream saying, hold on a second, why are we doing this? And they really want to create a paradigm shift. And I think that's brilliant.
Right. I do too. And, it always amuses me when I hear people just don't want to work anymore. And because the survey, when they look at the difference between the generations, they show that Gen Z is actually the most success-oriented generation of all of them. So they're success-oriented. They're incredibly adaptable. They are innovative. They want to start their own businesses. There's a lot going on for them. What they don't want is to fall into the same trap, which is how they see it, of this working 60 hours a week, because they're looking around and they're saying, what are you doing that for? Like, where has that gotten you? Again, like I said, these are people who have grown up after the Great Recession. They have dealt with all of these societal issues that we've gone through. They have, since they've come of age, we've dealt with this huge political landscape and all of this fighting in the climate. And just so many problems. So when someone, a baby boomer or somebody, comes to a Gen Z and says, no, you have to do it. We showed you, we're going to show you how to be successful, then the Gen Z can look around and say, but this isn't what I want. This isn't how I want to live, And so they are making those conscious choices of I don't want to work that way. I want to have work-life balance. I want to work a normal job. I want to work a job that I like. And I want to work a job that aligns with my values. And that's another big thing about Gen Z, is that they are incredibly tuned in with what they consider to be their values, a lot of social progress, and they want a workplace that aligns with those things. And so it might seem like they don't want to work at your company if your company is one that doesn't align with their values and doesn't give them that opportunity to work the way that they want or to balance their life or any of those things that are important to them. So I mean, yeah, it's not that they don't want to work. They do want to work. They just want to work in a way that is healthy.
They want to work differently than
Right.
the way past generations have worked, and maybe
Right.
not questioned when it would have been helpful to do so.
Absolutely.
Well, so what do we do? What do the younger generations who are working for the older generations need to understand and do differently, and vice versa? Like, what do the older gens that are supervising the younger gens need to understand and do differently?
I think the first thing that both groups need to do is acknowledge that there are differences between the generations, and that this is going to change the way that each group or person wants the environment to be managed. So we have to allow for those differences if we want everybody's needs to be met. And I think it's, like we said earlier, it's natural to say, well, this is how a workplace should be set up, and so everybody should conform to that. And if you want to play it that way, you can, but you're going to eliminate some people who are going to think it's not a great environment for them. And so I think it's worth looking at to say, how flexible can I be? If you have a workplace where you're calling everybody into the office, is that really necessary? Are you really getting what you need out of that? Because if it doesn't matter as much as you think it does, then you are missing out on a lot of good people. But I think it goes the other way too, especially, and I say this especially to Gen Z, because Gen Z experience in the workplace isn't that long. They've only really been in the workplace really since the pandemic. And so they don't have the same sense of norms as everybody else does. So they're not going to do the same, they're not going to experience it the same way. And so I really, to Gen Z, would say, give your employer the benefit of the doubt, because your manager, and let me back up just a second. It's documented that Gen Z doesn't trust companies, that they feel like companies aren't loyal to their employees, don't invest in their employees. And that's not without some kind of basis. Like, we have seen a decline in the way that companies have treated employees. There used to be a lot more investment in an individual, and there's not anymore. And when you look at the generations of baby boomers down to Gen X, down to millennials, I think companies were working on that capital for a while, where people were assuming that they were going to be taken care of, and now they're not. And now it's down to Gen Z, and that capital's gone. So I think it's easy for Gen Z to come into a workplace and say, I am going to only accept what I want. I'm not going to bend in any way, because that's the company trying to take advantage of me. So respect for intergenerational differences in terms of Gen Z coming in, I feel like, is maybe give your supervisor the benefit of the doubt, your manager, your colleagues, all of those things, because they are not the company. Most managers, most supervisors that I've had, they're really doing their best. They are not trying to take advantage of you. They don't want you to leave, because then they have to train somebody else, So maybe give them the benefit of the doubt and try to work with them. And if you come in with this defensive attitude of I'm going to tell you what I'll accept and what I won't, then you might be setting yourself up for failure. So I think that was acknowledging that generational differences is the first thing that I would tell both groups.
Acknowledging differences, both going into it with an open mind, and then communication.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The thing I would tell employers is be ready to invest. You're going to have to invest in your Gen Zers. You're going to have to you should be ready to invest in your employees, period. That is something that I dearly, dearly believe, is that you should be willing to invest resources in your employees, but especially Gen Z, because they kind of got the short end of the stick over the last decade, right? Looking at what's happened during the pandemic, they didn't get the training, the internships. They didn't get the same kind of in-school training that we did because of the pandemic. A lot of their final few years of schooling, they missed a lot of those opportunities. So you're going to have to invest in them. Also, they have worked the least of any generation in their in teenagers, as young adults. They have the least job experience. And that's not their fault. I mean, that's another thing where people say, oh, they just don't want to work. It's not really their fault. When you think about the layers of expectation we have put on them, you have to get straight A's. You have to be involved in these extracurricular activities. You have to do sport and play an instrument and all of these things. And then coupled with the fact that we have stricter safety guidelines for teenagers and young adults than we ever have. And so when you're not allowed to leave your house, when you can't, when you can't get your license, all of these things you're not allowed to do because we're worried it's not safe. How are you going to get a job? So they have the least work experience, and they've sort of been denied a lot of the training that would help them be a super valuable employee. So you're going to have to invest some resources there, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
To the Gen Zers, I would say you probably need to separate your wants from your needs. When you're thinking about, this is what I want an environment to look like, this is what I want it to be, think about, what do you need it to be rather than want it to be? Because wants are good things, and there might be a perfect environment. But there was a young man that I spoke to that was talking about, he really wanted to be working, but could not find a job. And couldn't find a job to apply for. And I would say, hey, what about this one? What about this one? And he'd say, well, I read this one line in there, and I don't think I would like doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just struck me because I said, well, when have I ever had a job where I've loved every single thing that I've done in that job? Never. It doesn't exist. If that's what you're holding out for, you're not going to find that job. So think about, what do I absolutely need out of this job, and what do I want, and what boundaries do I need to set, and what boundaries would just make me more comfortable.
I interviewed Adam Dorsey about a book about connection. Great book, great guy. And one of the things he talks about having to do with dating and choosing a partner is basically having a list of absolute must-haves, very importance, and would-be nices. And I've used that with clients outside of relationships because I think it applies to so much. And it just made me think of, when you're looking for a job, you can have absolute must-haves, like maybe you just had a baby and you don't want to travel, so that's a deal breaker, And you can have your things that are really important, but maybe not entire deal breakers if all the must-haves are there. And then things that this would be really nice, but if it's not there, it's fine. It'd be nice if they have a foosball table, but it's not necessary,
Right, exactly.
And I think where part of this has come from is very well-intentioned, probably Gen X parents telling their kids, find your purpose, find a job that brings you meaning, coming from a place of I've been a bean counter for 20 years and I'm miserable, do something that has meaning. And in some ways that's backfired. And I've seen a number of kind of younger generations not working and holding out until they find the perfect, just like you're saying, not just the job that doesn't have the thing they don't want to do, because of course there are going to be things that you don't like about your job. But if this job doesn't totally fulfill a purpose, I'm not going to do it. But there's also something to be said for graduating and getting out into the world and trying different things. We all have to kind of start a little bit at the bottom. And that's through that process of working, you can figure out, what are my must-haves? What are my very important? You don't necessarily know that as soon as you start out in the work world. And that takes experiencing some different things. And not every job you have is going to fulfill some giant greater purpose. So yes, think about your values in the sense of hopefully moving toward that really nice, well-rounded career, but you might not have it the moment you step foot into the job market.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that you brought that up about living your purpose. And if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. There's another young woman that I know, and she's an artist, and she's been an artist her entire life, loves to draw, loves to do all these things. She tried to make it into a career. And it turns out that if you are an artist as a career, you don't get to draw what you want. You draw what everybody else wants. And that goes right back to self-determination theory with the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. She is intrinsically drawn to art,
no pun intended,
motivated,
to drawing.
She's intrinsically motivated to be an artist. But one of the first things SDT teaches you about motivation is that the second you introduce extrinsic motivation into something that you were intrinsically motivated to do, that intrinsic motivation dies.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you don't have that feeling to do it anymore. So if you have something that you're passionate about, it's possible that if you turn that into a job, you'll kill it, right? So that's not really a great advice. What I used to teach when I was teaching about social psych, and especially when I was teaching the IO psych, was talking about the kind of things you like to do but like low key things. Like, do you like to organize things? Do you like to be really organized? Because then maybe some kind of office manager is good for you, or project manager. Do you like to lead people? Like, think about the kinds of tasks you like doing. And that probably is going to take you down a better road to finding a job than thinking about, oh, well, I really love art, so I'm going to go be an artist. When I did one of those job things, I mean, it's been 25 years ago now, but in school, when they said, what do you like to do? And I love to be outdoors. And they're like, you should be a park ranger. No, there's nothing about me that speaks to being a park ranger. You're asking the wrong questions. And if you ask those wrong questions, you're going to end up in the wrong place. So yeah, I think it's really well-intentioned to tell people do what you're passionate about, but it could lead them down some really disappointing paths.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a good point. I have a really good friend who's a brilliant chef. And everyone and their brother has told him, you should go to culinary school. You should be a professional chef. And he's like, no, because I know if I start getting paid for it and I'm cooking what's on the menu that I have to cook for other people, it'll sap the creativity and I'll hate it. And I don't want to hate this thing that I love. And I'm like, that is very wise.
Yeah.
You don't need to be in psychology to have that wisdom to understand that. Any last thoughts on like something that we can do to sell each of the generations on why it's worth it to make this change? Because one thing that comes to mind for me is I interviewed Eve Rodsky, and she has this system called Fair Play that is for creating a fair division of labor at home, domestic chores and childcare responsibilities. And I do this in my own home, and I'm telling you, it saved my marriage. I talk about it on the podcast all the time. She's my freaking hero. And I talk to everyone about this. And the thing I always hear is like, because it's typically women who are doing 60 to 70% and men doing less, even though they're doing more now than they used to in heterosexual relationships. And what I always hear is like, oh, my husband will never go for it because you're basically telling me I have to tell him that he has to do a bunch more chores. Why would he do that? And Eve really addresses that problem in talking about all the different ways, if we all get on board, this will benefit men too. One of the biggest probably being your wife will want to have sex with you again. Because when she's tired and pissed off and resentful and bitter, that's the last thing she's going to want to do. And, that's a big selling factor for men to be like, okay, maybe I should give this a try. So is there something that kind of applies here that, like I talked about, this kind of fear-based assumptions that lead to people being controlling? Like, how do we sell the Gen Xers and the boomers on potentially making massive cultural shifts to accommodate this incoming workforce?
I think the first thing I would say is you might get some time off that you don't feel guilty about. Because I feel like that, that is one of the things I see coming in from Gen Z specifically is they say, you know what, I'm important as a person and my time off is important. And it's just as important as the time at the company. And so when I look at myself, honestly, I go to work, and when I take PTO, when I take my vacation time, then it's, especially the first couple of days, it's a struggle to not think about what should I be doing or what would I have been doing at work? What problems are they having? What things should I be solving? What and how is my absence hurting the people who are still there? So I think this belief that we have that our work is more important than we are, I think that has caused us harm. And by bringing in Gen Z or other people who have this same paradigm shift of, no, my job is my job and it's really important and I'm going to do my best, but I am also important and I want to be my best self outside of work too. That balance of work and self, I think, would help everybody. And if you could get the generations who don't quite see that yet, which I think is mostly baby boomers and Gen X, and again, I'm including myself in this too, is if you can tap into that emotion, that feeling of oppression or of not ever being able to get time off or ever time to myself or I'm missing out on my life or any of these things, tap into that feeling and realize that I don't have to be like this. I could be better. This thought that Gen Z could make us better.
Yeah, it sort of brings it around full circle where I started out as this, I must be the same academic, robot that was, and then I saw, oh no, wait, there's this other better way. I can do that. And that will make me and them happier. And it's the same thing as like, hey, maybe instead of judging them and digging your heels in, like you could learn something from them and maybe it will benefit everyone. I love that.
Yeah. And that's one thing about Gen Z is that they are very other focused. Like they are very much about letting people be who they want to be and forming that sense of respecting other people and understanding their needs and wants. And so that's something I think they could teach the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to end with a little shout out. You are the CEO of a really cool organization, the American Psychological Foundation, which I had not heard of until I encountered you. Even as a psychologist, I was so surprised. I was unfamiliar with it. And so I would love it if you could tell our listeners about what it is, and especially, if they want to know more, where they can find you and learn more about APF, especially if they want to donate or if they want to apply for funds from APF.
Absolutely. I would love to. So the American Psychological Foundation, we're a grant-making foundation. So we have over 100 programs. Most of them are research grants, and they're small. We really focus a lot on grad students in early careers, trying to kind of provide that bridge of funding from that first project, that pilot project, when you aren't quite into the federal grants yet, but you need to kind of prove yourself to get into it. That's really our niche. That's where we shine. So those research grants, we also have some scholarships, fellowships, that kind of thing. And we've been around for a long time, over 70 years. But a lot of people haven't heard of us. And we're 95% funded by individual psychologists. So it's people who come to us to say, hey, I have this area that I really believe in, that I'm passionate about, and I want to make a difference there. And so we would send the opportunities out to schools and things like that. But because we were mostly representing those private donors, most people have heard about our programs more than they've heard about us. They've heard about the Playcheck grant or the Scrivener grant, things like that. But what we're doing now is focusing on this new area of getting psychology actually into the communities, because we've funded a lot of research, but now we're kind of seeing this gap between that research being done and that research getting into the communities that really need it. And so we are starting this new campaign where that's what we're trying to do. And as a part of that, we really want communities to kind of know who we are so that they can come help us with this new initiative of getting help to the people who need it most. So we're calling it the Direct Action Campaign. You can find out about that on our website. We're at ampsychfdn.org. And also, if you want, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm there as Michelle Quist Ryder, and on Twitter or X, I'm mquist Ryder. So you can find me at any of those places, and I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a great conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Jill. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.